In 1958, a single government decree triggered the most catastrophic biological war in human history, the Great Sparrow Campaign, a systemic failure cascade that turned an entire nation against a bird no bigger than a tennis ball. You have to wonder, how does a single government decree doom 30 million people? The authorities genuinely believed they were saving their food supply, but in reality, they were signing a massive death warrant simply by declaring absolute war on a tiny, winged creature. At the dawn of the Great Leap Forward, Chairman Mao Zedong identified 4 literal antagonists standing between China and total prosperity, 4 specific public enemies: the rats, the flies, the mosquitoes, and the Eurasian tree sparrow. The justification for this rested on dangerously simple arithmetic. Officials calculated that each sparrow consumed roughly 4 pounds of grain per year. Now, in a nation where hunger was a constant companion, that math seemed undeniable. Kill the birds, save the grain, end the hunger. But this was a fatal open loop. An open loop is a decision made with absolute certainty that is fundamentally flawed at its core, entirely due to a failure to account for invisible natural balances, a massive systemic glitch hiding in plain sight. Scientific warnings from biologists like Zhu Xi, who cited historical precedents of similar failures, were silenced in favor of political momentum. The expertise of those who actually recognized the impending catastrophe was buried under the heavy weight of state authority. And so, the war was officially declared. What followed was a surreal, terrifying mobilization of the entire population. From 5-year-olds to the elderly, the state unleashed a psychological weapon of sound, a tactic known strictly as the Great Noise. The strategy relied on sheer mechanical brutality, a campaign of absolute exhaustion. Citizens were ordered to bang gongs, drums, wash basins, pots incessantly. The objective was to ensure no sparrow could find a safe place to land, force them to remain airborne until their hearts simply gave out. This hysteria even crossed international boundaries. When the Polish embassy in Beijing refused to allow citizens onto their grounds to scare the birds, a 24-hour drumming circle surrounded the compound. The auditory bombardment was so intense that embassy staff eventually had to literally clear the grounds with shovels, scooping up piles of sparrows that had dropped right out of the sky from sheer exhaustion. The scale of the slaughter defies belief. By the end of 1958, upper estimates place the death toll at 2 billion sparrows. The sky literally rained dead birds, and the state briefly and falsely celebrated what they thought was a decisive victory over a perceived class enemy of grain. But that celebration was quickly swallowed by a deafening silence in the spring of 1959. By killing the sparrows, they had triggered a second open loop, the overlooked ecological reality that sparrows do not just eat grain. They are the primary predators of locusts and planthoppers. Without the sparrows to thin their ranks, insect populations experienced an unchecked biological explosion. Locust swarms moved across the countryside like a living carpet, devouring entire fields in a matter of hours. This single ecological disruption accounted for a nearly 20% drop in baseline crop production. City trees were completely stripped bare of their leaves by the swarms. This triggered a rapid, irreversible domino effect. The 1958 decree to kill the sparrows led directly to that spring 1959 biological explosion of insects, which wiped out the crops. And this plunged the nation directly into the dark years of 1959 to 1961, the Great Chinese Famine. This fatal catastrophe was compounded by a rigid government procurement system. Because officials expected a bumper crop from the elimination of the birds, they actually increased the amount of grain demanded from the farmers. But the reality was a desolate landscape of ravaged fields. The farmers, holding absolutely nothing but dust, were left to starve. The human cost of this glitch spiraled into the abyss. Tens of millions perished. And recent data pinpoints that nearly 2 million of these specific deaths were a direct, undeniable result of the Sparrow Campaign itself. This tragedy represents a catastrophic failure of general equilibrium. General equilibrium is the reality that a man-made shock to one part of a system will inevitably ripple through every other layer. Political enthusiasm had violently overridden ecology, and the cost was paid in millions of human souls. Physical evidence eventually forced an acknowledgement of the fatal error. By March 1960, autopsies of the few remaining sparrows revealed their stomachs were filled with insects, not grain. The logic of the initial decree had been entirely inverted. They had it completely backwards. The death warrant was hastily rewritten. The original 1958 decree to kill the birds was abruptly replaced by a sudden 1960 decree, stop killing sparrows. The sparrow was rehabilitated, quickly replaced on the enemy list by the bedbug. But you cannot undo an extinction with a memo. The ecosystem was already in a vicious tailspin. The desperation to fix this glitch led to a deeply surreal patch. A secret import of 250,000 sparrows from the Soviet Union was organized. Trainloads of birds were quietly shipped across the border to reseed the dying Chinese countryside. It was a desperate attempt to restore the delicate balance that had been shattered by gongs and wash basins. The Great Sparrow Campaign stands as the ultimate historical proof of the law of unintended consequences. This is the reality that when we try to conquer nature, we often only succeed in destroying ourselves. Nature does not forget, and it certainly does not forgive. It leaves you wondering how many invisible species would have to disappear today before our own food chain collapses. Is our modern scientific literacy any better now, or are we still just banging pots and pans at things we do not understand?